He was 17 years old when the most powerful man in the world decided he was going to rule it. He did not celebrate. The sources that survive from Marcus Aurelius's own hand, the private journal he kept for decades, never intended for anyone else to read, written in Greek in a military tent on the Danube frontier 40 years after this moment, record what he felt about power, about the imperial office, about the machinery of Roman authority that was being built around him like a cage made of gold. He was not grateful for it. He was not excited by it. He was, from the beginning, a man who understood exactly what the throne cost, in honesty, in solitude, in the slow erosion of the private self that public power requires, and who chose to bear that cost anyway, not because he wanted the prize but because someone had to, and he was the one who had been chosen. The Stoics had a word for this: duty. Not enthusiasm. Not ambition. Not the hunger for glory that had driven Caesar and Augustus and 100 Roman commanders before them. Just the clear-eyed acknowledgement that the work existed, that it needed to be done, and that refusing it because it was unpleasant was not a luxury that a serious person could afford. He was 17 years old and he already understood this. It would take him another 23 years to get the throne. By the time he had it, he would be the most prepared ruler Rome had ever produced. And he would spend the rest of his life wishing he could go back to his books. He was chosen by the emperor before he was old enough to shave. He spent 20 years learning to govern before he was allowed to govern. He became the most powerful man in the world, and the first thing he did was give half the power away. This is the story of the man the Stoics made and what Rome made of him. Subscribe, like the video, and let's start from the beginning. Marcus Aurelius was born on April 26, 121 AD in Rome. His family was Spanish in origin, the Aurelii, a senatorial family from the province of Boeotia, the same region that had produced the Emperor Trajan 2 generations earlier. Spain had become, by the 2nd century, one of the most reliable sources of Roman administrative talent. Families that had been Roman for generations without being Roman in the old aristocratic sense, that had absorbed the language and law and military tradition of the empire without the specific corruptions that old Roman money tended to produce. His father was Marcus Annius Verus, a praetor, a man of senatorial rank, respectable and unremarkable in the way that the fathers of remarkable men often are. He died when Marcus was 3 years old. 3 years old. The man who would become the philosopher emperor, who would write about loss and impermanence and the necessity of accepting what cannot be changed, lost his father before he could form a coherent memory of him. He was raised by his grandfather, also named Marcus Annius Verus, a man of considerably more distinction, 3 times consul, a figure of genuine weight in the Roman senatorial world, and by his mother, Domitia Lucilla. She is one of the people Marcus mentions with genuine warmth in the Meditations, the private journal he would write 4 decades later. He thanks her for teaching him to be simple in his way of life, to stay far from the habits of the rich. She was wealthy. Her family owned tile factories outside Rome, the kind of industrial wealth that the old Roman aristocracy found slightly vulgar, and she raised her son to be unimpressed by wealth. It worked. Marcus was, by every account, an unusual child. He was serious, focused, the kind of boy who preferred books to games, who found the company of philosophers more interesting than the company of other children, who took the exercises of the schools with an intensity that his teachers found either admirable or exhausting depending on their temperament. He was also physical. He hunted, he boxed, he wrestled, he practiced the athletic disciplines that Roman aristocratic education required. The image of Marcus Aurelius as a purely cerebral figure, a man of thought rather than action, is contradicted by the sources. He was strong. He could ride. He could fight. But what he loved was philosophy. He found Stoicism when he was approximately 11 years old, through a teacher named Diognetus, a painter and philosopher who taught the boy to sleep on a simple mat rather than a bed, to wear rough Greek clothing rather than the soft fabrics his family's wealth could provide, to practice the deliberate reduction of comfort that the Stoics believed was essential to clear thinking. His family thought this was a phase. It was not a phase. The Stoics had believed since Zeno founded the school in Athens 4 centuries earlier, that the good life was not a comfortable life. That virtue was the only real good. That external things, wealth, status, health, the opinions of others, were neither good nor bad in themselves but only in how you responded to them. That the path to a life well lived ran directly through the disciplined examination of your own mind, the identification of what you could control and what you couldn't, and the complete acceptance of the latter. For a boy who had lost his father at 3, who was being raised in the household of a senator while the Emperor of Rome occasionally came to dinner, who could see from childhood the specific ways that wealth and power corrupted the people who held them, this was not abstract philosophy. It was a survival manual. The Emperor Hadrian noticed Marcus when the boy was approximately 6 years old. This is not as strange as it sounds. Hadrian was a man of genuine intellectual interests. Architecture, poetry, philosophy, the Greek cultural tradition that the Roman aristocracy had been absorbing and imitating for centuries. He held salons. He collected talented people. He paid attention to the children of senatorial families in the way that powerful men with no biological heirs pay attention to the next generation, with the specific focus of someone who is, consciously or not, looking for a successor. He called Marcus Verissimus, most truthful. A nickname that combined a play on the family name Verus with what Hadrian apparently found most striking about the child: that he didn't perform. That he answered questions directly, without the flattery and evasion that children of powerful families typically learned before they could walk. Hadrian was dying by 136. He had no biological heirs. The question of succession was the most important political question in Rome, and Hadrian was approaching it with the same methodical intelligence he had brought to everything else. He chose a man named Lucius Ionius Commodus as his heir. Lucius died before Hadrian did. Hadrian chose again. This time he chose Antoninus, a wealthy, capable, thoroughly decent senator from a Gallic family, with one condition. Antoninus had to adopt 2 boys as his own heirs, his nephew Lucius Verus and Marcus. Marcus Annius Verus became Marcus Aelius Aurelius Verus. He was 17 years old. He had not been consulted. The adoption changed everything and Marcus knew it. His private life, the philosophical studies, the simple math, the conversations with Stoic teachers that had been the center of his world, was now officially secondary to his public role. He was the heir to the heir. The man who would, if everything went as planned, eventually sit on the throne of the Roman Empire. He wrote about this moment decades later in the Meditations. Not directly, he rarely wrote directly about external events. But the themes that run through the journal from beginning to end are all present in the situation he found himself in at 17. The gap between what you want and what duty requires. The necessity of doing the work even when the work is not what you would have chosen. The danger of letting the role consume the person inside it. He had a teacher at this time named Apollonius of Chalcedon, a Stoic philosopher whom Marcus credits in the Meditations with teaching him to be free, internally, even while being externally constrained. To maintain the private self intact while performing the public role. To be an emperor who was also, in some corner of his mind that the throne could not reach, still the boy who slept on a mat and read philosophy by lamplight. It was the central challenge of his life. He spent the next 23 years preparing for it. Antoninus appointed the greatest living Latin orator to teach Marcus rhetoric. Marcus Cornelius Fronto was the most celebrated advocate in Rome, a man whose skill with Latin prose was compared, by his contemporaries, to Cicero. If you needed someone to argue a case before the Senate, to compose a speech for the emperor, to demolish an opponent with the precise deployment of the Latin language, Fronto was the man. He and Marcus wrote letters to each other for years. The letters survive, not all of them but enough. They are extraordinary documents, not because of their political content but because of their emotional one. Fronto was genuinely fond of Marcus. Marcus was genuinely fond of Fronto. The letters are full of warmth, of teasing, of the specific intimacy of a teacher who knows his student is going to surpass him and finds this more satisfying than threatening. But Marcus was also pulling away from rhetoric. The Stoics had always been suspicious of eloquence. The ability to make an argument sound better than it was, to persuade through style rather than substance, was, in the Stoic framework, a form of deception. The truth didn't need decoration. The truth needed to be stated clearly and then lived. Marcus wrote to Fronto about this tension. Fronto wrote back defending rhetoric, arguing that language shaped thought, that the cultivation of style was inseparable from the cultivation of mind. Marcus listened. He learned from Fronto. He became a capable speaker. He never became an orator. He became something harder to train for and rarer to find. A man who said what he meant. The philosopher who shaped Marcus most deeply was a man he never met. Epictetus had died approximately 10 years before Marcus was born. He had been a slave, born into slavery in Phrygia, brought to Rome, owned by one of Nero's freedmen, eventually freed and allowed to teach. He had started his philosophical career with nothing, not even, according to one story, his own body, his master having broken his leg as a demonstration of power. He had responded to this by becoming one of the most lucid thinkers in the history of Stoicism. His core insight was simple enough to state and difficult enough to live that it occupied Marcus for the rest of his life. There are things in your control and things not in your control. Your opinions, your impulses, your desires, your choices, these are yours. Everything else, your body, your reputation, your property, the opinions of others, is not yours, not truly, not in any way that should determine your peace of mind. Marcus encountered Epictetus's ideas through his discourses, transcribed lectures compiled by a student, and they hit him with the force of something he had been trying to articulate for years without finding the words. He quotes Epictetus throughout the Meditations. Not always by name, the journal was private, written for himself, not a citation index. But the ideas are there on every page. The return over and over to the distinction between what you can control and what you can't. The instruction to himself, and it is always instruction, never celebration, to stop caring about the things that can't be changed and to focus with everything he has on the things that can. He was the most powerful man in the world, and he spent his private hours reminding himself that power was not in his control. That is either the most stoic thing imaginable or the most honest. Possibly both. Hadrian died in 138. Antoninus Pius became emperor. Marcus became the heir, formally, legally, publicly. He moved into the imperial household. He began the long education in governance that Antoninus conducted by simply doing the work and letting Marcus watch. He was 17 years old when this started. He would be 40 when it ended. 23 years of watching, of learning, of sitting in the room where decisions were made without being the one who made them, of understanding the empire from the inside, its administration, its military, its finances, its politics, the 1,000 daily decisions that keeping Rome functional required, without the final responsibility that came with the purple robe. He spent those years reading philosophy and writing letters and hunting and doing the work that was asked of him with the conscientious thoroughness that the Stoics demanded of every task, however small. He also fell in love, got married, and buried several of his children. Because Marcus Aurelius was not only a philosopher, he was a man. And the years before the throne were not only preparation, they were a life. The next episode is that life.